How did an empire of philosophers, strategists, and legendary warriors fall to an emerging power with no aristocratic tradition? For centuries, the names of Sparta, Athens, Thebes, and Corinth evoked glory, bravery, and refined strategy. The Greeks invented democracy, perfected the art of war with the hoplite phalanx, and carved their identity in honor and sacrifice. Yet Rome, a mere speck on the Italian peninsula, watched, learned, and evolved. What seemed like historical backwardness concealed an invisible advantage: the art of adaptation. Sun Tzu wrote, "The supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting." Rome defeated Greece not just on the battlefield, but through mastery of time, perception, and indirect strategy. While the Greeks fought for glory under rigid codes, the Romans waged war for survival, shaping each legion as a living organism, ready to retreat, deceive, or strike unexpectedly. Instead of wielding honor as a shield, they brandished efficiency as a weapon. But there's a deeper truth to this fall. Greece's defeat wasn't the result of a single mistake or an isolated clash. It was the accumulation of friction, in the most Clausewitzian sense. Friction between city-states that hated each other more than they feared a common enemy. Friction of pride, tradition, fragile alliances, and disjointed strategies. Clausewitz warned, war is the realm of chance and friction. Greece lived in perpetual friction, and Rome, with discipline and purpose, exploited every crack. This video isn't about a sudden collapse. There's no single moment when everything crumbled. What we'll reveal is a progressive tactical erosion, a decay of Greek superiority fueled by structural flaws and Rome's cold brilliance. With every battle, every negotiation, every road built, Rome undermined the Greek world without needing to destroy it outright. Because Rome didn't need haste, it needed dominance. And it built it stone by stone. Prepared to understand tactically how a warrior people succumbed not from lack of courage, but from excess rigidity. We'll uncover the blind spots that toppled the legacy of Leonidas, Pericles, and Alexander, and the invisible tactics that made Rome the unstoppable empire. By the end, you won't see victory as an act of force, but as a process of strategic intelligence. Get ready. The battle began long before swords clashed.
The military landscape of classical Greece was grand in its feats, but fragile at its core. No empire was built there, only proud city-states, often allies of convenience and almost always rivals by nature. Athens and Sparta, Thebes and Corinth shared a language and gods, but not command, doctrine, or long-term strategic vision. This structural fragmentation was, from the outset, the invisible crack in the marble of Greek hegemony. Each polis defended its honor as an end in itself, not as part of a collective goal. War wasn't seen as a means of survival, but as an assertion of local identity. In this gap between pride and action, Rome began its silent work. Roman diplomacy saw what the Greeks refused to admit. Division wasn't just political, it was a strategic vulnerability ripe for exploitation. Rome approached Greek cities with offers of agreements, protection, trade deals, and promises of autonomy. Each Roman alliance with a Greek city was, in practice, a wedge driven into the heart of the Hellenic world. Athens looked at Sparta with disdain. Sparta responded with mistrust. Both ignored the rising power that sought not immediate prominence, but patient tactical insertion. The lack of a unified military doctrine among the Greeks prevented coordinated responses. When Rome advanced by sea or land, it didn't face a solid front of resistance, but scattered reactions driven by local interests. While Sparta prepared for a classic land offensive, Athens banked on naval superiority. Thebes hesitated, waiting to see the outcome. Rome, meanwhile, advanced with the pragmatism of a single central command, guided by a strategy of systematic absorption and pacification. Unlike Greece, where power rested on the prestige of individual cities and the autonomy of their generals, Rome forged a functional chain of command. There was no room for rivalries between legions. Orders flowed from the Senate to the battlefield with clarity and purpose. For every Greek hesitation, Rome responded with tactical consistency. This fragmentation wasn't just political, it was logistical, doctrinal, and cultural. Greek cities disagreed on weapons, army organization, and which style of combat was most honorable. The phalanx was revered as a symbol of unity, but in practice each city tweaked the model to its liking. Rome, by contrast, honed its doctrine with brutal discipline. The Roman legion wasn't just a military formation, it was a philosophy of adaptable, replicable, and above all, functional warfare. Greece's true error was failing to see that its cherished internal freedom, celebrated in speeches and theaters, prevented unified action in times of war. It was precisely this vacuum of command, this absence of collective vision, that Rome exploited. Not with haste, but with method. Each Roman treaty was a seed planted in Greek soil, and when the branches began to grow, it was too late to cut them down.
The Greek phalanx was a monolith, a block of shields, spears, and men advancing as a living wall, crushing enemies with collective strength. It was the geometric perfection of ancient warfare. But it was also its prison. Rigid in formation, slow to maneuver, dependent on flat terrain and absolute cohesion, the phalanx's glory was its limitation. Rome understood this and created something radically different, an army that didn't march like a statue, but moved like an adaptable organism. The Roman legion was built on layers of flexibility. Soldiers were organized into cohorts and maniples, each capable of acting semi-independently, reconfiguring based on terrain, enemy, or need. The result was a military machine that could compress in defense, expand in attack, bend like a bow, or strike like a blade. Cohesion was maintained, but not at the cost of mobility. It was a living force, capable of thinking on the move. Sun Tzu wrote, "Be like water, adapt to the enemy's shape." Rome brought this idea to the battlefield. Against the Macedonians, the legion broke the phalanx's momentum with lateral attacks. Against the Gauls, it absorbed their initial fury before counterattacking in a pincer movement. Against the Greeks, it turned direct combat into a dance of exhaustion and territorial control. Once outmaneuvered or flanked, the phalanx couldn't turn, react, or regroup. It was too strong to retreat, too heavy to flank, too inflexible to survive. Roman adaptability wasn't limited to troop structure. It permeated doctrine, leadership, and the ability to handle the unpredictable. While Greek generals sought to replicate the feats of Marathon or Thermopylae, Roman consuls adjusted plans to the realities of the battlefield. No battle was treated as a stage for honor, but as a problem to be solved, with logic, flexibility, and cold precision. More than a tactical innovation, the legionary structure embodied a military philosophy that scorned rigidity as a symbol of strength. For Rome, strength lay in transformation. In uneven fields, Gallic forests, or Latium's hills, legions retained their identity while changing form. This enabled something Greece never mastered: effective command of vast territories in prolonged campaigns. While Greece fought as if each battle were a duel between heroes, Rome fought as if each conflict were a military engineering operation. That changed everything. The phalanx might win a day. A well-led legion won the war. It was the difference between a single thunderclap and a relentless storm. War ceased to be a spectacle and became a system. In that system, victory didn't depend on honor, but on adaptation.
For the Greeks, war was more than strategy. It was ritual, glory, an affirmation of identity. The battlefield wasn't just a space for victory, but a stage for virtue. Warriors fought with bravery, directness, and unwritten codes defining what was acceptable or shameful. Honor wasn't just a value, it was a duty. And this duty, which so often elevated them, also blinded them. Because war, in the end, doesn't respect codes of nobility. It rewards effectiveness. Rome grasped this distinction with surgical precision. For Roman generals, war was a process of attrition, manipulation, and domination. If the enemy relied on directness, Rome offered deception. If they expected resistance, Rome feigned weakness. When opponents sought a duel, Rome set traps. The goal was never to appear honorable, it was to win. And winning meant surviving, advancing, controlling. Greek moral rigidity prevented them from accepting certain tactics as legitimate. Deceiving the enemy, faking retreat, attacking at night, breaking agreements, or using spies, all were deemed unworthy of a virtuous warrior. Rome had no such qualms. To the Romans, every tactic was a tool. There was no shame in retreating if it enabled a counterattack with advantage. No dishonor in feigning weakness if it lured the enemy into error. In battles like Cynocephali, the world saw this difference in action. While the Greeks advanced with a confidence of direct confrontation, the Romans waited for the gap. When it appeared, they struck without hesitation, hitting the flank, disrupting the line, dividing the troops. The phalanx, with all its prestige, collapsed not from lack of strength, but from excessive predictability. It was defeated not in courage, but in calculation. Rome's willingness to break conventions reflected a more mature understanding of war. The battlefield doesn't reward the just, but the effective. It doesn't celebrate the noble, but the victor. In this sense, Rome understood something Greece, with all its wisdom, refused to accept. The enemy doesn't respect your code, they exploit it. Greece's tragedy was believing that victory meant fighting with purity, that glory was inseparable from directness. Rome, more pragmatic, saw glory as a consequence, not a prerequisite. A legion's honor lay in the victory that preserved the republic, not in gestures that pleased tradition. And so on the battlefield, Romans broke the rules, not out of malice, but vision, because they knew that, in real war, what seems dishonorable often saves the nation.
An army isn't sustained by the courage of its soldiers or the genius of its commanders alone. It's sustained by its rear, by the steady flow of supplies, weapons, reinforcements, and information, by well-planned roads, stocked depots, and precise timing. In ancient warfare, chroniclers often overlooked this element, but strategists never did. Rome elevated logistics to a silent weapon, and it was through this that they won battles without always needing to fight. Clausewitz said, "War is simple, but difficult to execute." Difficult because it demands continuity. Every advance must be backed by a robust supply chain. This is where Greece faltered. Focused on displays of immediate strength, Greek city-states rarely integrated efforts into lasting logistical systems. Each expedition was near autonomous, each campaign sustained by heroic improvisation. Rome, by contrast, planned like an engineer. Its wars were built before the first sword was drawn. Roman road construction wasn't just an engineering feat, it was a strategic tool. These roads carried troops on forced marches, supplies in organized carts, and messages between distant commanders. Every centurion knew that, even if isolated, they weren't abandoned. The state ensured their support. Roman cohesion came not only from legionary discipline, but from the reliability of the machine behind them. While Greek troops faced arduous treks over rough terrain, relying on local farms or plunder, Roman legions operated with predictability. Standardized camps, supply points, mobile reserves. The battlefield was merely the end point of an operation that began long before in maps, plans, and logistical decisions. Victory was cultivated, not improvised. Greece's failure wasn't just technical, it was doctrinal. Few Greek leaders saw logistics as a weapon. It was viewed as support, not a vector of dominance. So when conflicts dragged on or lines stretched, the Greeks fragmented, hesitated, retreated.
Rome, by contrast, advanced like a steady column. Even in distant campaigns, like those in Gaul or the Punic Wars, Rome kept a firm grip because it understood that controlling terrain meant controlling supply lines. Rome's logistical superiority shaped not only its victories, but its reputation. An army that never runs short, never stops, never yields, inspires respect before the fight begins. At this level, war becomes a clash not just of arms, but of systems. Rome's system, linking Senate, roads, camps, and legions, wasn't just functional, it was unbeatable. Because where the Greeks saw glory in immediate effort, Rome saw power in silent sustainability. And that sustainability decided who stood tall in the end.
War doesn't begin with the clash of arms. It begins with the battle for perception. Before the first shield is raised, fear, expectation, and judgment are already in motion. Rome, more than any ancient power, understood that winning is also about convincing. An army dominates not just by what it does, but by what it represents. Rome's methodical, constant presence shaped allies' thoughts and paralyzed enemies. Their victory began before the march. When occupying territories, Rome didn't merely control roads and walls, it imposed order. An order visible in the columns of legionaries, disciplined camps, and punctual sentries. It was a force that radiated regularity, predictability, authority. This power didn't brutalize immediately, it persuaded. It created routine where there was chaos, stability where uncertainty reigned. And this fostered a different kind of obedience, one born of acceptance, not just fear. But fear was part of the equation, and it was calculated. The Roman legion wasn't just respected, it was dreaded. Not for savagery, but for the certainty that when it struck, it destroyed. Rome's reputation, built through successive campaigns, projected inevitability. Enemies didn't face just soldiers, they faced a concept. Resisting Rome was resisting the course of history itself. A war against Rome felt like a war against fate. Sun Tzu warned, "Intimidate before you attack. The enemy is already defeated." Rome perfected this. It didn't always need to invade with full force. A garrison, an alliance, or a disciplined march past city walls was often enough. Rome's order spoke for itself. For many local leaders, the choice was clear: align, adapt, or be crushed. Resistance was often defeated before the fight, because the mind had already accepted defeat. This psychological impact was even stronger against Greece's fragmentation. City-states accustomed to autonomy wavered between pride and pragmatism when faced with Rome's presence. Pride urged resistance, but pragmatism, fueled by fear and the perception of Roman efficiency, often prevailed. With each concession, Rome expanded not just in territory, but in influence, myth, and authority. Rome's presence was a strategy in itself. It didn't require constant violence, just persistence. Repetition, discipline, and predictability created an atmosphere of silent domination. Once established, it was hard to reverse, because it wasn't just about occupying land, it was about occupying minds. In this invisible domain, the Greeks, so proud of their reason, were outmatched by an empire that wielded fear as a tool of governance.
On the battlefield, intelligence lies not just in maneuver, but in strategic humility. Observing, absorbing, and adapting aren't signs of weakness, but marks of supremacy. Unlike most conquering civilizations, Rome didn't destroy what worked, it incorporated it. With every campaign it learned, with every defeated enemy, it extracted a lesson. This mindset, more than brute force, cemented Rome's dominance over Greece and the Mediterranean. The Romans weren't ashamed to learn from those they fought. They adopted Carthaginian naval techniques, Numidian cavalry tactics, Etruscan engineering methods. From Greece, they took far more than architecture and philosophy. They took tactics, formations, and combat doctrines. But unlike the Greeks, who clung to glory immortalized in statues and tragedies, Rome operated with cold pragmatism. If something worked, it became Roman. Its origin didn't matter, its utility did. Greece, rich in culture and military prowess, fell victim to its own pride. Even in defeat, Greek generals hesitated to change. Tradition was sacred. Altering combat styles was almost an insult to their ancestors. The phalanx, though outdated against mobile legions, remained idolized. Rituals, formations, and values persisted, as if war respected the past. Rome, pragmatic. New war only respected results. This difference in attitude shaped their fates. While Greece celebrated its legacy, Rome wrote the next chapter of history. The Romans didn't fight to preserve what they were. They fought to become better than they'd been yesterday. It was a cumulative logic, where each conflict was a step toward absolute efficiency. Rome's military culture was alive, mutable, resilient. This adaptability extended beyond the battlefield. It permeated politics, architecture, language. Rome was a civilization that absorbed and reshaped the world around it, not out of insecurity, but out of a superior vision. Every piece of knowledge incorporated was a new weapon. Every practice assimilated, a new brick in the empire's foundation. Greece lost not for lack of intelligence, but for excessive reverence. It trusted too much in the brilliance of its past and refused to alter its essence. Rome embraced the discomfort of change, understanding that true strength isn't fidelity to a form, but to a goal. If the form must change to secure victory, so be it. This cultural advantage, invisible to the hasty eye, was decisive. In the end, it wasn't the side with the grandest origins that won, but the one that learned faster. War is a harsh school. Rome graduated as its master. Greece, with all its wisdom, remained captive to the lessons of the past.
At the end of this strategic journey, one truth stands clear. Greece didn't fall from physical weakness, but from structural rigidity. Its collapse wasn't sudden, but the results of accumulated proud decisions, internal divisions, and a silent resistance to change. The empire of philosophers and legendary warriors wasn't defeated by brutality, but by the systemic intelligence of an adversary that saw war as art, science, and constant adaptation. Rome didn't defeat Greece in a single battle. It won through every hesitation, every city that refused to cooperate, every phalanx that clung to an unchanging formation. It won by building roads, moving supplies, integrating enemies into its system. It won by treating war as a continuous process, where every element, from soldier to infrastructure, contributed to the outcome. The central lesson, woven through this documentary, is unmistakable. Winning a war requires more than glory or bravery. It demands adaptation. It demands listening, observing, absorbing. It demands retreating when necessary and advancing with precision when opportunity arises. Greece fought as if each battle were a theatrical performance. Rome fought as if each conflict were an equation to be solved. The strategist B.H. Liddell Hart wrote, "The indirect approach is the path to lasting victory." Rome followed this principle without proclaiming it.
It avoided direct clashes where Greece was strong, striking where it was vulnerable, in division, rigidity, predictability. It was as if Rome fought not against men, but against the mental patterns of a civilization blind to its own decline. This story is more than a military chronicle. It's a tactical mirror for modern times. How many victories today are lost not from lack of strength, but from excessive pride? How many systems remain unchanged out of loyalty to tradition, ignoring that the enemy has already evolved, adapted, flanked? Rome won because it knew how to learn, because it didn't fall in love with its form, but with its purpose. And that mindset, more than legions or gladii, was the weapon that made its dominance inevitable. Greece taught the world the value of reason. Rome showed the value of adaptation. In war, it's the latter that decides who endures and who fades into history as a glorious, vanquished memory.